This morning we are honored to be joined by three distinguished legislators, and I mean that. These three individuals have indeed worked hard. They're decent, honest public servants who really care and are very responsive. I'll start off with Assemblyman Patrick Diegnan. He is the chair of the Assembly Education Committee. During his 10 years in the legislature, he has been one of the strongest voices on matters affecting our public schools. The Assemblyman represents the 18th District in Middlesex County. Next, we have Assemblyman Albert Coutinho. He is a member of the Assembly Budget Committee. He also chairs the Commerce and Economic Development Committee and is a member of the Human Services Committee. He represents the 29th District, which comprises areas of the city of Newark and the town of Belleville. Albert always gets a little upset with me when I say that he's probably one of the state's leading experts on budget, and he is. Next, Assemblywoman Mila Jasey. Mila is no stranger to New Jersey school boards. She served on the South Orange Maplewood Board of Education for more than 8 years before she became a member of the Assembly in 2007. She serves on the Education Committee, and Mila represents the 27th District in Essex and Morris counties, and she is another real advocate for children. So, I want to thank the members of the legislature who I just introduced. They're special people in my book, and we're really happy to have them. Now, to moderate our panel discussion this morning, we've selected a person who I believe is the most respected educational journalist in New Jersey, someone I have known for 20 years, and his name is John Mooney. Right there is John. Hi, John. I first met John when I was superintendent of schools in Madison, and then when I was president of the Garden State Coalition, he also covered a lot of the work of that organization. At that time, he was the chief education reporter for the Bergen Record. Later, John assumed that same role for the state's largest newspaper, the Star-Ledger. John is the founding editor of New Jersey Spotlight, the issues-focused news website. He's also known in state circles as the moderator extraordinaire. He regularly contributes his knowledge to panel discussions on important public policy issues, such as our session today. John, as always, we've been through a lot, and I've always found you to be honest, decent, and forthright. You're the best. Please take over.
Hello, everyone. Certainly no shortage of news facing you and your members. When I started NJ Spotlight 3 years ago, we made a decision at the time that we were going to be posting news stories every day on the issues we cover, and it's not just education, we also cover healthcare and energy, environment issues, and public finance. But when we made this decision that we'd be posting every day, at least 5 days a week, I was a little worried, were we going to have enough news? That is not a problem. I'm now worried that we don't have enough reporters. I literally have my pick of news every single day, and in terms of education, it's just a matter of whether I can get some reporting done on it and get it out. But it's been an amazing run, very good for NJ Spotlight, probably a little dizzying for the rest of you, but it's working out. We have with us today to talk about some of these issues, really three very major players in the Assembly when it comes to education, and I don't believe any of them are running for U.S. Senate, so they should be around for a while. But if you want to announce, this is the place. And while they're all obviously Democrats, they all, certainly strong-willed and have different perspectives and passions on these issues. So I really think we're going to have a really good discussion that isn't just the party line by any means. None of these folks, I would say, necessarily follow party lines. They've both brought very important details and perspectives of some big issues that face you all. Now, the way we're going to do it, because I know we're a little rushed for time, because obviously we all want to get to the State House, is we're going to approach a topic by topic, and I think at the end of each brief session that we're able to talk, we're going to do budgets, we're going to talk about charter schools, we'll talk about teacher evaluation, hopefully we'll get to all of them. But at the end of each, we're going to open it up to a couple questions. So that you can catch. I know somebody in Diegnan had to leave a little early, so we're not shoving it all at the end, and everyone's rushing out the door while we're trying to get to some questions. So, and Ray, I think we'll just hand the mic around. You don't have to come up. We'll come to you. Full service here. Let's start with the budget, because obviously that's imminent, and there's a lot of pieces to it that are interesting and somewhat controversial. I think most of you all care about the state aid that's coming back to you. It's not a lot in terms of an increase, 1% overall, and for some 200 districts at the moment, it actually might represent some cuts when you factor in some of the fees that you're being charged back on. And then I think there's 40 of you who are getting a whopping $1. And I actually I can double your aid right now for at least 5 of you. But let me start at the end of the table. Assemblyman Coutinho, do you see much change at this point? Do you see much change happening in this budget in terms of state aid to districts? Give us a little intelligence on where things stand.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I wish I had better news, and as somebody who sits on the budget committee, just let me speak briefly about this year, and then big issue that I think people in this room need to get their arms around for the foreseeable future. I think the budget, as it sits, will be what you're going to get. Obviously, within education, there's no talk about any major changes, whether the Democrats introduce our own budget or we end up negotiating. So, point number one, very simply, what's on the table right now is probably going to be what you get. My concern is, mid to long term, with the structural problems that the state has, we're going to be seeing increasing pressure over the foreseeable future for restrained growth in funding, and probably at some point an attempt to redo the formulas and to reduce funding. And here's what's going to happen. Basically, let's call it 4 years from now, projected education and pension contribution will be 40% of the state budget. Because of the increases in the state pension obligation over the next few years, every year you're going to see between 580 to 600 million more going towards pensions. That's going to crowd out any growth in any line item. And basically, I believe it'll get to a tipping point in roughly 5 years when the other bombshell, which is our transportation trust fund, which we basically is bankrupt and we've borrowed. We have a plan in place now for 5 years, and it's going to come due. So come January of 18, there's going to be some major problems. And when you think about the structural problems that the state has, and you got education and pensions of 40%, you can rest assured people are going to be zeroing in on it. So I wish I had better news, but I think not only should you, let's say, be prepared for the number you have right now, but for the foreseeable future, you're looking at flat funding, and I really think it's imperative on boards, to the extent, I know everybody loves home rule, you need to try to start looking for solutions to reduce costs, possibly share services, to the extent that the state association or national association can look at other solutions. Because let's say if you don't come up with your own solutions, my concern is in 5 years' time, there's going to be a group of folks, whoever they are, sitting in the legislature or in the governor's chair, that say this is what we're going to do. So I don't want to scare anybody, but I have to be truthful. And the structural issues of the state are basically indicating that we have some pretty tough struggles ahead.
So, Jasey, your thoughts on this year and going forward in terms of the state's support of schools?
Well, first of all, let me say good morning, and I want to just put a thank you out there to all the PTA and school board members, because you're all volunteers and you're advocates for children, and I think that sometimes, many times, when we're talking about ed reform and we're talking about budgets and everything else, we forget to talk about children and the impact on them. So I thank you for that, because I know that they are foremost in your thoughts. In terms of the budget, I really can't add anything to what Albert is saying, because I think he laid it out very honestly and clearly. The one thing I would emphasize, though, is that you should all be figuring out how to voluntarily consolidate. There was an article in the paper yesterday about Princeton and Princeton Borough, and the fact that they are looking to save, I think it was $3 million per year as a result of their merger. I represented South Orange Maplewood Board of Education, and it too is a combined district. There are certain sizes that afford more efficiency and are better, I think, in the long run for everyone. And while we love home rule and all of our small districts, it's a more expensive way to go. So it's more than just sharing services. I think it's actually actively looking to merge.
Senator Diegnan, and I will ask on the budget issue, do you see, and you're part of the caucus as well, do you see any changes at all coming? And one of the pieces that I hope to at least touch on is the Opportunity Scholarship Act piece. It's $2 million in the budget that the governor has proposed that would go towards a very small pilot of what is essentially school vouchers. They keep changing the names, but it's basically a voucher for low-income students in certain districts to go to schools of their choice. But and that's that's only $2 million out of $12 billion, but certainly it's something that's gotten a lot of attention. Do you see changes in that? Do you see any changes in terms of even some of these debt service fees that have been levied on districts that are putting them a bit in the red? Give me your sense of what's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks.
First of all, I'm totally against vouchers, no matter what ingenious name they came up for. To me, it's ironic that, as Albert is saying, while some folks continue to say there isn't enough money, we got to cut back. Education is the first place we have to cut back on. We're come up with $200 million for a bizarre casino in Atlantic City that everybody knew was going to fail the day it opened. We're directing money towards that, which, let's admit it, it's a shopping center in the Meadowlands, which we said we'd never put a shopping center in the Meadowlands. And oops, by the way, it can't open up on football Sunday. It all has to do with priorities. Are we faced with fiscal problems in the state of New Jersey? Yes, we are. However, to just say, oops, by the way, live with it, it's never going to change, tighten your belts, consolidate. First of all, let me just give you my experience with consolidation. I actually represented, I no longer represent, Spotswood. Spotswood and Elmetta, under our former governor, were urged to merge their school systems. It's actually costing them more money now than it did before. If I represent Edison and Metuchen, Metuchen is the hole in the donut. I am regularly lobbied by everybody. Why doesn't Metuchen and Edison merge? If Metuchen and Edison merged, the cost in Metuchen would go up by approximately 1/3, because police, fire, and school employees in Edison Township make approximately 1/3 more. So why am I saying this stuff? There's no magic bullet with any of this. However, and a friend of mine said this years ago, you can talk the talk when you're on the campaign trail. I'm for everything. You name it, I'm for it. But the budget is truly where the rubber meets the road. That's a moral document. And when you set forth your priorities in the budget, that is where you really set forth your commitment. In my mind, I wouldn't be here. I say it over and over again. Both my parents were immigrants. I would not be here if it was not for affordable, available, public education. And this urging of vouchers and urging of charter schools, we've got to have, we did it with the tenure last year, we're doing it right now with charter schools. We've got to sit down as a group, regardless of where you stand on these issues, and prioritize where our responsibilities are and then fund it appropriately. To say that whatever our funding mechanisms are always going to be the same, it's not true. Years ago, we had a challenge concerning funding the arts in New Jersey. We found a solution. It was called a hotel tax. Half of it goes to the towns, half of it goes. We now have the most vibrant arts funding in the country. It can be done, but we've got to sit down and talk about it together and stop demonizing people, stop separating, stop pounding our chests and say it can't be done. Because in my mind, nothing is more important than public education. It is what makes us the United States of America. If kids that speak one language go to one school and kids that speak another language go to another school, if kids of one color go to one school and kids of another color go to another school, ultimately that's the end of the democracy as we know it. So this is a debate, a discussion that we have to have right now. Right now.
I think we'll do a couple questions, Ray, if you want to find somebody. But let me follow up on that with Assemblyman Coutinho. He makes the point, and others have raised this, that consolidating districts doesn't necessarily always save money. And we went through a time, when, to be honest with you, the last couple of years I thought there would be more of it because, we were in such crisis. Address this point, because this is something that comes up a lot in terms of, is it worth the effort? Is it worth the cost savings, if there are cost savings?
Sure. Let me say that I very much agree with the premise of what Assemblyman Diegnan pointed out, that education is a top priority. But in terms of being truthful with everyone, I would be doing a disservice if I didn't tell you that's what I had mentioned is what I see coming. Because we are one of the states that is investing the most in education already. We have some of the highest property taxes in the country, and we have very high tax rates. So it's inevitable that this pressure is going to be there. And as Assemblywoman Jasey would say, to the extent that you voluntarily identify situations where there are savings, you should take advantage of them. There's no question, especially in some of the outer-lying areas, when you bring in the transportation issues of consolidation, it may not work. But realistically, if you have two districts that are close to one another, and you could save a few $1 million by merging the administration, I believe there are savings there, and it would be better for you to do it voluntarily than somewhere down the road be forced into it. So again, I do believe that for the next few years, you're not going to see, probably, let's say this next administration, whoever it is, they're probably going to dedicate revenue growth to that extra pension payment. But again, basically 5 years from now, when that payment gets so large, and when you couple it with the other $800 million gorilla, which is the TTF, that's where the rubber's going to hit the road. So you have a few years to prepare for what's going to be a bombshell come 2018. So yes, there are savings there, but it's important for people, to the extent that you can research it voluntarily, and take advantage of whatever opportunities there are.
You have a question? We'll only be a couple at a time, and then we're going to talk next a little bit about charter schools.
Yes, sir. Kathy Steele, New Jersey PTA, Essex County. Good morning, Assemblywoman. As a public employee, I know we've started to pay into our health benefits, which is something we had never done before. And I'm talking really pay into our benefits. I don't even want to go into the percentage. In addition to, when we want to take out a pension loan, we now pay, a fee for the pension loan as well as the interest. Where is that revenue going, and what is the state realizing in terms of revenue with those funds each year?
Sure. Well, real quickly, in terms of the healthcare contribution, that's going back to the district, and that's saving money. In Newark, for example, Newark saved $7.5 million this year, and that's that's people that didn't have to lay off. There's no question that is a shift. And again, one of the things I think that needs to happen, and while I believe that something needed to be done, so I supported, let's say, those reforms, I was unhappy that we didn't have more collaboration in putting it together. And one of the things we need to do that was not done is we did not address why is the healthcare policy costs, why are they growing so exponentially? And that's where associations and different groups need to look at. Let's now address to make sure we're not just shifting costs and asking the public employees to pay more, but let's see if we can actually reduce or limit the growth of that policy, because that's also another concern of mine. We're talking about $19,000 an employee, and it's growing. to the extent that we can look at why doesn't it cost $13,000? And there are, for example, the building trades policies is somewhere at $13,000. So I think those are the sorts of discussions we need to identify and try to come up with the cost savings so it doesn't get imposed on you. So the direct answer is any additional contributions are going to the district or into the pension fund.
Another question on the budget?
How you doing? My name is Keith Fisher, Berkeley Township Board of Ed. I'm part of a district that's a K-6 district that's located in the same town as the regional district. Over the past few years, we've been trying to get sharing our services with our busing, just as you discussed. So it was kind of refreshing to hear that there's concerns like that. We just recently did a feasibility study to share our busing. We were told by the Office of OEM, since we're located within 10 miles of the Oyster Creek generating station, that we can't reduce our services, or combine our services, because we need all the buses we have to bus the students and teachers out. But what I'm saying, what I'd like to know is, is there someone in the state legislature or anything like that that could kind of provide any help with showing us this is what we need to do? Because in our town, we're pretty much pushed, anything shared services is pushed away from one half to the other half. Some people want it, some people absolutely don't want it. And I'm one of the people that want it. That's why I'm on the school board to kind of help push that along, because just like you said, there's a real issue going to be coming our way, and I think a lot of people are blind to it. I mean, we have over 2,000 students in the same town. We have another 2,000 students that is a sending district, and we have two superintendents in the same town, two business administrators. It makes sense, but we're getting pushed around it.
I mean, I always say the same things. The place you should start is with your individual legislators. I have no idea who represents you. Who was it?
Christopher Connors.
Okay, he's a good guy. And obviously the county superintendent would be the one that could move this along. But this is the first time I heard this. But clearly, if there's a savings involved, no one would want to discourage you from saving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just, it has to do with the people,
With the
local officials
Yep.
in town.
Okay.
I want to, just because we're going to move to the next topic, because I wanted to give Assemblyman Diegnan a chance, because I know he has to leave. Charter schools. Assemblyman Diegnan has a bill that I think he has dropped, is that right? That would basically rewrite much of the 1997 law and address some of the issues that have been clearly rising up over especially the last few years. But I want to give you an opportunity to give us a quick summary of sort of the key provisions in your bill and your rationale for them.
I mean, we're all aware of, there's been some really bad stories concerning a handful of charter schools. Overall, charter schools have performed about the same as the other public schools. Some have failed, some have succeeded. They're not some secret success story which some folks represent them to be, but they are an option, and nobody opposes them. So the purpose of this bill, plain and simple, is to put transparency, consistency, annual accountability into the whole charter school process. And again, we use the exact same template as we did last year with the tenure reform. Everyone who was involved, and all of you at this table have had a seat. We did not presume what the bill was going to look like. That's not the way I think legislation should be done. We got everybody's input first. We gave them the opportunity to revise sections. Some folks are happy with one part, some folks are happy with others. Monday, we're going to actually have the bill up in the Education Committee for discussion only. It's always my theory, if you get everybody engaged on board to begin with, then it's more successful. The most important part of it is we are creating a review board, which would consist of 9 members of the Department of Education, which basically 3 appointed by the governor, 3 appointed by the Senate President, 3 appointed by the Speaker, and they would basically be both the authorizer and the annual reviewer. So we would have an entity with staff, etc., that would be consistent, so there would be forum shopping. And again, that was as a result of the input of the various groups. We went back and forth. I know Mila worked on this for years. We went back and forth with maybe making the colleges as authorizers, and that wouldn't work. And some folks wanted every individual Board of Ed to be the authorizer. That would be very cumbersome. Some folks wanted to leave it with the commissioner, which hasn't really worked that well. So I think this is a compromise that will work. So the process is starting, but when all is said and done, and I know everybody in this room knows what I'm getting at, we don't want a kid to start at a charter school that 3 or 4 years later is going to be closed down. Okay, we want to know that before it starts, it's properly vetted, and then on an annual basis, it's properly vetted. So if there are problems, I mean, we're all aware of this nightmare that's going on right now in Newark. We don't want that type of circumstance to happen again. But the process is just starting. You know, my hope was that we would get it on the governor's desk before we adjourn. We will not, because again, I'd rather do it right than do it quickly. But it's still my goal to have it done before the end of the year. Maybe maybe Governor Rona will sign it next year. I'm not certain.
Let me follow up with you on this. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the provisions of the bill is requiring a local vote before a charter is ultimately approved. A popular provision in this room. But that is one that is, you know, I think certainly the governor is pretty clear that he would not sign something like that, and there's lots of questions raised of whether another charter school would ever open if there was a local vote. Speak to this. I mean, it's clearly the one that's probably the most tension, even among some Democrats.
I don't understand that premise. First of all, if the community is not supportive of the school, by nature, it's got 2 strikes against it before it starts. I just don't buy the premise that they say a charter school will never be approved if it requires voter input or referendum before it. Show the community, especially in our failing district, show the community that this is an asset, that this is going to give the kids options. I can't imagine that the community would not support it. One of my problems with the continuing takeover districts is, are they ever going to give them back to the community? They're going to continue to, if the community feels that the Board of Education is not with them, is not part of them, they're never going to support it properly. As far as I'm concerned, we should expeditiously give as many takeover districts as we can back to the cities of which they reside, and let the community have part of it. And I think this is a continuation of that. I represent East Brunswick. There was a charter school that was approved, a Hebrew language charter school in East Brunswick. It is a constant, divisive, every event I go to in East Brunswick, this comes up. How did this happen? Who approved it? It's taking away tax dollars. It's just not healthy. So I don't understand why the governor opposes a referendum and public input. I mean, after all, last time I checked, this is still America, right? And let the people decide. I mean, to me, that's an important issue. I mean, we can discuss it, but it's one that I'm going to have a hard time getting off, because I think in the long run, community involvement makes the process stronger. That's just my view.
So, Jasey, I think we'll take, because of the timing, we're going to take some questions on charter schools, so you can find.
Okay, I just want to add a couple of comments to that. First of all, I want to thank Assemblyman Diegnan for taking this on. The only thing one thing that I would like to see added to it or considered along with the new legislation is, I think we need some information about how the legislation has worked over the last number of years. We need some data in terms of how many schools opened, how many closed, why did they close, what were the issues, which schools did well, because for me, the biggest missing piece in all of this is that if you read the original legislation, it's pretty simple. The intent was to create lab schools or schools of innovation, schools that were more nimble, if you will, to address issues. And then the strategies and the solutions that they came up with would then be shared with the regular public schools. That has never happened. It happens in individual situations, but it's been scattered. It doesn't really happen because it's not in the legislation. And one of the things I would like to see is, I'd like to see a process spelled out in the legislation to facilitate that happening. And that for me is the piece that's missing.
We have a question on charters?
Well, it's just one on money itself, whether it encompasses charters and budgets. Frank Storm from Burlington City Board member. On the end of the past administration, this is to Assemblyman Coutinho. The state basically made a move to go from private investment, from public investment control with the state to private investment control of the pension fund. I was wondering how's that working out for you guys? You making any money with the private investment versus?
Okay, I will tell you, I could probably, get your leadership some updated information. I do believe that the pension fund is improving. For those of you worried about COLAs, for example, only when the pension gets to 70% would people be eligible for COLA. I don't have the specific numbers. I do know that there has been, let's say, with the market rebounding, that the pension funds are improving, but they're still nowhere close to, within the education field, the 70% that would be needed for a COLA adjustment to be authorized. So it is improving, but it's still not, where we need it to be.
Can we
Stay on charter schools.
Stay on charter schools? And a question for, just because he's leaving, is this a question for Assemblyman Diegnan? Okay.
Yes. The question I have with charter schools is around funding. So I'm a superintendent of the Ann Arbor Township school system. And in our budget years, we're one of those school districts that's had a budget with ED assessments, and so we didn't see new funding. But we're also then held hostage with new charter schools having to put funding aside. In 1 year, $700,000 that they keep from the students in our community in Ann Arbor Township while the charter school is in the process of setting up. That never comes to be. What can we do to make sure that those resources are available for schools while the process is unfolding? Is there any protection to have those dollars be released?
I mean, it's always about the money. People say it's not about the money. It's always about the money. If you're going to reach the goal line, you've got to have proper funding. And that was part of the problem in East Brunswick. $1 million was taken away from the public schools for the charter school. The charter school went in all of the shopping centers in East Brunswick. We put up a notice, put your kids in a charter school. We have full-day kindergarten, while simultaneously East Brunswick was doing away with full-day kindergarten because they lost $1 million. I mean, it was really, it's about as crazy a circumstance as you could see. So you're absolutely, I mean, it's always about the money.
Does your bill address? No. Okay.
And I'm going to be honest with you. The reason I did not deal with the funding aspect of it, I think this is the worst time to deal with the funding aspect of it because the budget is challenged. We have to go, there's two, as Bill Clinton said, it's called arithmetic. That's my favorite line at the Democratic Convention, which I was forced to watch. And it's all about arithmetic. There's two sides of the equation. But everybody's saying, oh, jeepers creepers, there's not enough money. Well, there are other ways to raise money, and that's a debate and a discussion. I have always been a believer in holding a constitutional convention and sit down and figure out once and for all how we are going to properly fund education in the state of New Jersey. You folks in this room are on the front lines of being the bad guys because of property taxes. I'm sure everywhere you go, you're the ones that raise my property taxes. We got to have a discussion about this. And that's the way you reach solutions, is by having a discussion rather than standing up front, demonizing people, calling people names.
So the funding would remain at 90%?
That's the way it is right now. That's a separate issue, and I think it's a separate issue that should be done. We all know the economy is starting to turn around. Let's deal with that issue when we have a little bit of money coming in as opposed to when we're on a you-know-what right now.
And one other question, your bill also does not address virtual or online schools. Can you speak to why you didn't want to?
Because that is a very, very complicated issue. I'm happy to see that the commissioner rejected all of the virtual charter school applications, and you saw that. That's big time stuff. I mean, you could be talking about something crossing the whole state, and that's a whole separate issue. Clearly virtual can be a part of charter schools, but to have a dedicated virtual charter school, I got some real hesitance on that.
What do you see as the process of addressing that? Is that going to be?
Well, again, we don't want to inhibit technology. We don't want to inhibit innovation, but that's light year leap that we really got to get a handle on before we go forward. As far as I congratulate the commissioner. I think the appropriate course of action right now is to take a time out on any virtual charter school application until we get our arms around this whole process.
I know you had to leave. Do you have any final comments you want to make?
Great job as well. I think it's the best turnout ever, right? Okay. You guys are on the front lines. I say, Albert will say the same thing. Mila will say the same thing. Please reach out to us. Somebody said something to me the other day that I didn't even realize. The towns that have switched from the prior Board of Education date to the November date, that we never changed the filing deadline? I didn't even realize that. Yeah, so there's a bill on that.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff slips between, heck, who would have ever thought we'd have 3 different choices as to a general election? So these are things that sometimes fall between the cracks. Please reach out to us and let us know what's happening in your town. You know, this question concerning the busing, I never knew that with Oyster Creek. So don't just presume we know. Reach out to us, that's all I can ask you to do. And we'll try, okay? Keep up the good work. Okay, I'm sorry I got much.
Assemblyman Coutinho or Jasey, speaking of, and I think you both supported it, to the idea of the local vote. Is that, do you see support in that politically to actually become law on charter schools?
Ladies first.
What I hear from my constituents, from the 14 towns that I represent, is they want a local say. They want a local vote. And I think that the angst and the way people feel about this really goes to the money question, but it also goes to a distrust of the decision-making process in how charters are approved. And I think that also goes to the capacity issue. I don't think our Department of Education, and this is not a criticism, but this is an acknowledgement, that there is a real capacity issue. There are so many things that we expect that we're asking them to do, and yet they don't have the personnel to do it. If you look at their chart, people are constantly coming and going. When you don't have stability, it's very hard to make progress. I would make the same analogy with the superintendent cap issue. The increasing mobility, the increasing turnover of our superintendents leads to instability and difficulties on the local level. So yeah, I think there's a lot of support for a local vote because of the money that has to be set aside for charters. And I also think, I would tie it back to my earlier comment about, I think we need to more clearly define the roles that we expect charter schools to play. I don't think charter schools are going to go away, but I also think that we need to be very clear about why they should open if they should open. What issues are they addressing? It's not a matter of, well, I think I'd like X. No, there has to be a real clear reason for opening a charter school, and there has to be some kind of goal in what we hope to learn through that, that opening. And that's not what I'm seeing. What we saw in my district recently was what was called boutique charters opening. Mandarin immersion. Well, that might be nice, but our first priority has to be to make sure that every child is getting a thorough and efficient education. And I see something like a Mandarin immersion or any number of other ideas as luxuries that we can't afford right now, at least.
Yeah, my 2 cents on charter schools, because I haven't had a chance to speak on it yet. Look, I come from the city of Newark in my district, and it's an extremely hot button topic. Last session, Assemblywoman Jasey and I worked on some very substantial charter school accountability legislation, which did pass the Assembly. Unfortunately, did not move in the Senate, and a lot of those components, I believe, are in Assemblyman Diegnan's bill currently. My position with charter schools is, look, I come from an urban district that has serious problems, and I believe it's my responsibility to have an open mind and to make sure we have a serious discussion of anything we can do to try to improve the reality of those children. So on that premise, I'm not against, let's say, the idea of charter schools. However, that's what the legislation Assemblywoman Jasey and I worked 2 years ago. I believe that it has moved beyond, let's say, its legislative even authorization. And to the extent that there are high-performing charters that are improving the overall situation, we should embrace them and allow them. If they're not bringing anything new to the table, there's no reason for them. And then we should not allow them, and we should shut them down. Clearly what's happened in Newark and I'm sorry, even statewide, instead of charters being, let's say, laboratories where we test things and then bring them into the general equation, they've become alternatives, let's say, and we're just doing too many of them. And that's my position, because in Newark, yes, there's 2 or 3 phenomenal charter schools, and most of the other ones, to be perfectly honest with you, are mediocre and shouldn't exist. So I believe that's the legislative belief. What we need to do is, let's say, set the parameters. If something could help, we should allow for it. But if it's not clearly bringing a benefit, we should do away with it. And to that point though, and here's the interesting thing. The direct answer to the question is yes. I would support a public vote on the opening of charters. Here's the interesting thing that'll happen. It would do away with, let's say, some of the conflicts in suburban communities with the boutique schools, because clearly there they would be voted down. But the interesting thing is when you look at voter turnout in school board elections and things of that nature, I would tell you that in the urban areas they would probably all succeed, and then there's no guarantee then, obviously, that the value is there. When you look at the waiting lists in the inner cities, and you look at the waiting lists in the inner cities, you look at the turnout in school board elections, let me tell you, they will be approved. So somebody would say, well, okay, that would mean you get charter schools in the urban areas and not in the other areas. That may be the outcome. And my concern still is are we making sure that there is a value added? So I do believe, we are in America, so why would you be against giving the voters their opportunity? But there's a lot more, that needs to go into that whole discussion.
Yep, question?
Good morning, Ann Carey from Westfield, Board of Education. If we could just go back to the budget for 1 minute, I'd like an update on the STA assessments, if possible. I heard that there was a meeting earlier this week, and there might be some movement on rescinding part of that.
I would just tell you that I did hear that there was a meeting. I have not gotten official notification of an outcome. So unfortunately, I don't know if Assemblywoman Jasey has something on that. I do know that the legislature had a problem with the way that was done. A lot of school boards have spoken out about it, but I cannot give you a direct answer of where we are in terms of amending it. I have not gotten notification that there's been a formal agreement to amend it as of now.
Yeah, what I know on it is that the Senate Budget Committee hearing, Senator Sarlo spoke of at least restoring or reducing it by $13 million, which would at least leave everyone held harmless to the SDA assessment that you had the year before. But it's all part of a negotiated budget, which these are, and oftentimes these are bargaining chips, and it could dictate the future of the Opportunity Scholarship Act too. It's how much the governor pushes it, how much the legislature pushes back, and I'm not sure we'll know until we know. Right. My sense of following these things for a little while.
I would just say, in terms of the negotiating chips, I don't really know how high up on the, it's not really that high up on the priority list. I'm not saying it's not an important issue, but in terms of somebody who's on the budget committee and has somewhat of a sense, I don't know if that would be a deal breaker in either direction.
Question on this, and then we want to move to.
Good morning. My name is Nicole. I'm from Hudson County. I reside in Jersey City for my district. And I have a question about the charter school legislation regarding special education. I work with a lot of parents, and some of them have children in the charter schools. They end up pulling them out of the charter school because it's not, for lack of appropriate services, and not really following the full code of procedure for the children to receive services. What is going to be done about that? Because it's happening continually where the children will have IEPs, and IEPs are not done appropriately in charter schools. Are they getting trained for it, and is this going to be a better push if a parent wants their child in charter school as an IEP to ensure that they are getting the appropriate services that is parallel to their school districts?
So, Jasey, this is a big issue, I know, and you care about it.
Yeah, that's a huge issue, and we're well aware of it. I think, again, going back, I don't know if you heard my earlier comments about capacity. I think that's an area where the department, being the only authorizer in the state, has not met its obligations to really vet services at charters and to make sure, to do the kind of oversight that's required to make sure that children are receiving what they're legally entitled to do. the legislation that Albert and I worked on 2 years ago also tried to address this issue in terms of the demographics of the charter representing, and this is also in Assemblyman Diegnan's bill, needs to represent the demographics of the district that the charter is in, and that would include services to special needs children. And unfortunately, I mean, I talk to parents all the time, and very often, especially in our cities, parents choose charters because their perception is that they're better, and then when you press them on why do you think it's better, well, it's safe, it's small, you know, the same kinds of answers that I get from parents who choose parochial schools. It's not always based on facts, but rather on perception. And I think that we have to understand that and make sure, we have to work a lot harder to make sure that our regular public schools are safe and are providing the services that children need. So one of my overarching concerns here is that in the talk of ed reform, there is way too much media attention and discussion of vouchers and charter schools as being the answers, when in fact, that's less than 10% of our children. 90% or more of our kids are going to be in regular public schools, and that's where I feel we have to put our resources and our attention, and to make sure, again, that every child has the opportunity to have access to a safe environment and excellent education.
Amen.
Let me bounce to a topic that does affect every school, teacher evaluation. You all are in the throes of this, and I'm sure virtually every single school is going through putting in place these new requirements for teacher evaluation. I know Assemblywoman Jasey, you've talked a little bit about maybe catching our breath on this. Do you want to talk a little bit about your resolution? I think you're still planning to do that?
I am.
Okay.
I am. It's not in final form yet. I'm working with OLS on that. Basically, I was a prime sponsor of Teach New Jersey, the Teach New Jersey Act. I was in an elementary school yesterday for an hour and a half, meeting with their student council, but then talking to some of the teachers there. I have yet to meet a teacher or an administrator that says we don't need to change how we evaluate teachers or administrators. I think we're in agreement on that. The question, again, goes to one of capacity, PD, resources, at a time when we've lost administrative resources, where we don't have the resources to train administrators to do the evaluations, where we don't have the resources to train people who are going to evaluate the administrators. I think we do need to pause, take a breath, and amend the timeline. That's what my resolution is about. I think it's important to acknowledge the importance of teacher evaluations. However, if we really are serious about making these changes, and the goal is really about improving education and making sure that there is an excellent and effective teacher in every classroom, then we need to take the time to do it right. Because if we forge ahead and force the issue before we even have the data from the pilots on what are the problem areas, what's working, where do we need more resources and more work, then we will fail, and it'll be yet another reform that is looked at as a failure, and oh, what do we do now? We just need to, you know, either privatize or we need to go in another direction. My biggest problem with education reform over the years has always been that we never give it enough time to work and to happen. It doesn't happen overnight.
What specifically, in terms of your timing, are you talking about a year?
I'm asking for at least a year, another year as a pilot, a year when the evaluations that are being done don't have high stakes consequences tied to them. Because again, I don't hear anyone saying that we can't do it, or we don't want to do it, or we won't do it, but rather we need time, we need resources, we need to implement it in a way that achieves our goal. And as I said, as a prime sponsor of that legislation, I want to see this work. I don't want it to go up in flames because we didn't give it proper vetting. And we also need to recognize that there are so many demands being placed on our school districts. And we've got changes coming down the pike in terms of the core, the Common Core, and Park, and I know that school boards is looking at, do we even have the bandwidth to support the technology, if in fact you have the computers to put the kids on, to take those tests in a couple of years. There are a lot of unanswered questions, and I think we need to slow this train down a little bit so that it can continue going forward and not derail.
Senator Coutinho, I know you've heard a lot about this issue as well.
Yeah, I was, and actually I want to thank Assemblywoman Jasey and Assemblyman Diegnan, obviously, that were both sponsors of Teach NJ. I was the original sponsor of Teach NJ and was intricately involved every step of the way. And if I could, let's be very clear. The success of that reform, the first 10-year reform in over 100 years, okay? Now, I agree we need to give time. I think 100 years is much more than any of us could afford. So we needed to do something. If I may, though, I think the controversy coming up around evaluations is success that led to the eventual passage of Teach NJ is broken down. Everybody was at the table. Everybody collaborated on how that legislation could work. The School Board Association was part of those discussions and made some significant contributions. Okay, that was my big role. I was like the negotiator in chief, keeping everybody in the room. 3 of the most painful days of my life was with Commissioner Surfs and Senator Ruiz and members of the NJA. Extremely, I was still recuperating from it. But the reality is, there was some missteps in terms of how much was going to be allocated to test scores in some districts and what have you. And I think what's critical is we need to make sure that all the stakeholders are there and we don't rush it, we do it right. Because that whole reform, which was, I believe it passed unanimously in both houses, and it had the support of every major education group in the state. You need to keep that coalition together and work it through. Give it time, as Assemblywoman Jasey does. But you got to continue to move forward, but make sure everybody stays together, or else what could be a very promising reform will end up being stuck in the mud. So I do support the most important thing I believe that needs to happen that isn't happening is that coalition that, let's say, okay, this is what we're going to do, is now stop talking again. So we got to make sure that everybody's at the table.
Would you support a timeout of sorts?
Well, you know what? I think what we need to do, I would like to see everybody come back to the table and adjust the timetable. Arbitrarily just, moratoriums really don't work. Economics is my background, and artificial saying, all right, let's just stop. I do agree that we can't push forward until everybody's together. So in that regard, I would support, let's say, a resolution to that extent, because the conditions aren't there for it to be successful. But that being said, I believe what we need to do is, instead of just saying, all right, let's stop, is let's, as quickly as possible, get everybody back, and let's discuss it and set a reasonable timetable and do it right going forward.
Right, it doesn't say stop it, it just says, adjust the timetable. Yeah.
We'll take some more questions. We'll take some more questions.
We were told that it's 45% of the testing scores because I'm in an urban district, and we're governed, a couple of schools are governed by RACs. So for our schools to maintain adequate yearly progress, they have to have 45% of their students passing the testing. But then I was in another meeting with the parks, and they're saying, well, you should expect at least a 20% testing reduction in our test scores. So I'm putting, like the gentleman said earlier, math together. If the RACs are expected to raise their test scores 45%, and the teachers are expected to perform at a higher rate, yet their evaluations are we're looking at them to be evaluated, and the testing service is saying, well, expect 30% drop in testing. Aren't we setting our teachers up to fail?
Yes.
We have the Department of Education telling us one thing on one end. They come to another meeting and tell us another thing on the other end. And I strongly believe in supporting our teachers, but where do we, as average citizens, where do we come in? Where do we say, I'm with you saying stop, slow it down. I still believe in changing the process, not, the evaluation process, but let's give them a chance to make our children successful. How do we support you? And I'm all for supporting you. Let's slow it down, because our teachers need an opportunity to succeed, not to be failing right when they come through the door.
Thank you for that. I think you just described what my frustration every day, just in terms of the RACs, the Regional Achievement Centers. There are many double-digit vacancies in those entities. Okay, so if you have if you're a priority or a focus school, and you're being coached by people from the RAC, but the RAC doesn't have people to do the coaching, then how can you be held accountable for that? Same thing with the idea that the different tests that we're using are changing all the time. There are problems with some of the tests. When it comes to Common Core, we don't know what those tests are going to look like. We don't know if they're valid. There are just so many questions, and I think your frustration is reflective of that. How can you help? I would say that, we're in contact with your organizations if and when we ask for support, that you give that support. And you give it in a positive way. And again, going back to the fact that you are advocates for children. What's the impact on children of all these things happening? Okay? Nobody's talking about that. I can tell you, because my daughter is an elementary school teacher, she will tell you very clearly what she sees in terms of impact on 3rd graders and 5th graders, which are the grades that she's taught. And it's devastating. All year long they're teaching children to be cooperative, collaborative, to work in groups, and then suddenly, especially in 3rd grade, for the first time they're taking these high stakes tests, and they raise their hand and they want to ask a question. It's like, no, I can't talk to you. No, you can't talk to her. No, you have to do this all by yourself. And she tells me stories of children crawling under their desks and crying and just really falling apart. So I think as parents and as advocates for children, we need to also be talking about that. How much testing is too much testing? How much do you need for accountability?
If I could, just real quickly, one thing, I wanted to add, big part of that, the 10-year reform bill, was the issue of multiple measures. And one thing I just wanted to correct, unless I heard it wrong, you had mentioned an absolute passing. Any usage of test scores has to be based on progress. So it's not a matter of absolute results, to be very clear here, okay? So one thing the legislation is clear. No matter how much you use in results of testing, the key is how much progress is being made, not the absolute success rate. So very important. That was one of the things that was very important to me. So I agree with what Assemblywoman Jasey said, but nowhere in the legislation does it say that you're going to measure the absolute success rate. You're going to measure the progress of the kids. The other issues of how much testing is appropriate is still there. I will tell you that during those negotiations, one of the things we were trying to fix the maximum that could be allocated to test scores. The discussions were somewhere 20 to 30%. Nowhere did it ever go over 30%, but we couldn't get agreement to put a maximum percentage in there, and that's why it wasn't there. But in terms of, let's say, what a broad consensus of people were talking about might be appropriate, 20 to 25% was sort of where we were at. Nowhere in the 35, 40, 45 range.
And I think that the language you did end up with is they will not be predominant.
That's correct.
Which
that was the one thing we were able to agree on, that it wouldn't be more than 50.
Right.
Hi, Jennifer Montone from the City of Burlington Board of Education. While I'm in full support, like everybody else, for slowing the train, I think that the resolution, we need to speed that train up, because as a board member, we're already planning for next year, and we're adding more supervisors and more administrators to handle this, because we're anticipating a lot more time to be spent. So we are actually just approved this past Monday 2 new positions to handle this, and now we're being told, oh, you might not need that. So this...
No, I'm not telling you won't need it.
For next year.
You're going to need those supervisory positions. The problem is, how are those evaluations going to be used, and are you going to be able to get them even all done? The sheer number of evaluations, the amount of time that those evaluations take to be done properly is definitely going to require more supervisors. So you should be planning going forward. But what I would like to see is, I'd like to take some of that pressure off, so that we don't make it high stakes, that we make it, that it's more deliberative.
Okay. So you were discussing having the pilots extended. So would all districts be in a pilot type program for next school year?
No, not that, no. Everyone wouldn't be in a pilot, but rather, we don't yet have, my understanding is we don't yet have the data from the pilots to inform how to move forward. When that data comes out, then it needs to be shared with districts, and that's why I'm saying, if we had another year for everybody to kind of be finding their way here, so that in 2014, starting with that school year, then make them count. But they're going to count this school year, 2013-14. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think we've run out of time, unfortunately. It's 10:30, and I know these guys have hearings to attend as well, and I have hearings to attend, and I think you guys have hearings to attend. So I want to thank.
Don't underestimate your influence talking to your representatives, your assembly members, your senators. Don't assume that they're aware of what you're going through, because there's so many different things that we have to keep track of, and each of us, you know, we serve on different committees, so our focus tends to be on those issues. But I find it very valuable to have my constituents come in. Don't send these form letters. They just, I mean, we got, I don't know, 400 or 500 yesterday, and it just shut down our whole operation from the gun lobbyists. Make a phone call, write a personal note, make an appointment, come in with some people, and one of the things I always say to people is, don't come in just to complain, come in with a solution. Okay.
And I might add, in my shameless self-marketing, is contact NJ Spotlight as well. You know, the more we hear from the public, the more we can get these issues out as well. I will leave some cards up here, and I will also leave a couple of dollars for those who are looking to double your state aid. So thank you very much. At least final words.
I think the 3 members of our of the legislature who were here today, 2 of which are still sitting here, really care about kids. I think you can feel it. I think you can see it, and I think they give us a very important message of hope. I think these are reasonable people, and I think we need to communicate to folks like that when we have something that's really in our heart and soul about what's good for kids. So join me again in just thanking them for being with us.